Okay, so I put this in the A sessions, by the way, even though this is, of course, an Ampler community of practice, and this recording will be made available. Some of this material we're going to be going over today is we've seen before. I put this in a different format, though, to maybe make it more tangible. I'll be candid about something too. I had remembered thinking a few weeks ago that what I was planning to do in this session was to talk about like the essence of Agile and what you need to do to be Agile. And I just had that in my head. And to be candid, I was preparing for that talk, which is a different talk, until this morning, I think it was, when I said, oh, I better go back and check what the public announcement. Actually, I didn't even think that. It just showed up on LinkedIn. Somebody commented about the event this morning and I said, oh, that's interesting. That's not what I prepared for. Uh, I am prepared for talking about what we said I'd talk about, though, and we will talk about that. But this other preparation led me to some interesting questions about a conversation. What is Agile? Okay, because it clearly is not, there's not an agreed upon definition anymore. In fact, there wasn't an agreed upon definition back in 2011. And the way I know that, I know that because I was back then. In fact, I would not even say there was an agreement back in 2001. But the reason I know for sure it wasn't back in 2011 is I was at the 10-year anniversary of Snowbird, the Agile Manifesto's signing place. I wasn't at the first one, but I was invited back to the second one, along with David Anderson and maybe one or two newbies, because Kanban had kind of come to the forefront, and we were the two, big proponents of Kanban at the time. And back then, with about 20, 25 people, I can't remember the exact number, I think it was 24 maybe. There were about 15 different opinions of what Agile is or should be. So back then it was already not bifurcated, multifurcated, multi-universe kind of thing. And it's gotten worse. And when I talked about um, two choices to make, like two uh, groupings, I guess, or I was talking about whether you're taking responsibility or not for what's happening. And it was triggered by a post by some Scrum proponent who was talking about how managers are this and managers are that. And it was just the straw, I guess, that broke the camel's back for me because I keep hearing that every day. And it gets set up by a lack of explaining things to management. Management has a definite role. It's just not the role they used to have. It's not a role to manage people. That hasn't been a role in a lot of good companies for years, decades. Lean is not about managing people. Deming said this. It's about creating environments within which people can work well. And he goes back 80 years. Think about that. 80 years. This is old technology that's still not being adopted in the agile space. So anyway, I would like to talk about that if we have time at the end, but don't feel rushed. I think I'm going to use this as the next session because I got some really interesting stuff, and I'll probably write something on it and then point y'all to it. So we're going to do what I said we were going to do, which was looking at a couple of case studies and going into some things. I think this is good too because it's tangible, and I'm going to try to limit this. I've got quite a few slides, but some of it has discussion in it. So I might go past the 30-minute limit because there's going to be 5 or 10 minutes of discussion in this. So that's what we're doing. I'm just saying understanding Agile because that's the idea here. And I think there's some new stuff and there's some old stuff. Some of the old stuff is more to the ACEs. Some things I've done in the ACE sessions I did. I don't think anything. Um, there's a lot of stuff that's I did in the ACE program. I didn't do in the ACOP, so it's worth doing it. So this is what we're going to be talking as an agenda. I'm going to talk about something that hasn't been talked about a lot now that Jeff Sutherland said back a long time ago, 2001, 2002. He talked about hyper performing teams, which I totally agree with. And when he meant hyper performing, he meant 30 times productivity at the team level. And it's possible. I've seen it. And it's kind of interesting because why would he say we can only get 4 times at the organization if we can get 30 times at the team? That poses another interesting question. And we may talk about that today or not. Why dedicated teams are so important. The key is removing delays while working. We talk about the cause of delays and where our time goes. And this is going to be just some little subheadings that we get into. So you don't need to remember this, but this was my outline. This is what I said we talk about, and we're going to. So I just love this quote by Winston Churchill. We've got to lose this behavior. Men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of the time pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing had happened. There's this myth in the agile space that you learn best by failure, and that's just totally wrong. My biggest insights came about due to success. Something happened I didn't think would happen, and when it worked, I stopped to think. See, I stumbled across the truth, but I didn't get up. I said, what the hell happened here? I mean, my understanding of emergent design, which is big, happened because of a success. My understanding of large scale design with Christopher Alexander happened because of success. Now, I admit, prior to the success, I had to stop because I was failing. So, failure gives you the opportunity to stop and to look and ask, why am I failing? And then try something new. And then when you get successful, you can ask, gee, why did that work? What was it about that that was outside my understanding? And we don't seem to do that a lot. Or at least I don't hear people talk about it. It's really, I think, a brilliant thing to do. Okay, so this is where I got this insight about hyper performing teams. Let me tell you, this happened 20 years ago. I can't really remember. This was in the early days of Agile. People didn't understand why Agile worked. There was a lot of stuff about culture in Agile and things of that nature we didn't quite get either. And went into a company and they were asking me to do a little bit of an assessment for them. And they had two teams that for whatever reason, they selected these two teams for me to analyze. And one team, I'm just going to call them team one. This was at a health insurance company, just to give you a context. But to be candid, I don't think that had anything to do with what happened. It was just where I was. So team one was clearly three times more effective than team two. There was no question. Nobody doubted it. It was really clear with the productivity levels, what they were getting. And the question was why? And the biggest difference between these teams was they both had comparably skilled people. They were both working on similar products. So it wasn't that. It wasn't skill. Because I interviewed these people. I talked to them. Yeah, they're pretty good. None of them knew Agile. So this wasn't an Agile, but they were smart. The big difference was that team two had a business analyst come in providing the requirements to the team. Then they were available on questions. And then at the end, they came back. It was usually the BA came back in to do quality assurance. Okay. And it'd usually be the same person, but not always. Now, what's interesting is the two teams did work the same way. It's just in team one, this business analyst and QA was on the team. So they were always there. And in one case, they weren't always there. Okay. So one was physically co-located, like they were in the same area, and the other one was maybe scattered around a little bit. Actually, the team part was also co-located, but the BAQA person was in another building in the complex. That was the only difference. So, what do you account for the differences in the results? This is a conversation. I'm not going to tell you. I mean, I want you to talk to me. I'm going to leave these up here so you can see it. Uh, Let me put this up here so you can see it. And I'm asking you, and I'm going to just take notes. Oh, no, I'll just leave this up here like in the big screen. So I'm going to, on a Word document, off screen, or I can put it down here actually. What do you count? Why would you think this would make a difference? Why would one be three times? Same people, same process, slight difference in co-location. What do you think would account for this? Put yourself in the shoes of the two teams. What would be better or not better?
They
Being
would have a
located in the same place facilitates communication a little better. You're able to read body language, you're able to interact almost immediately.
Yep. Okay. John, it looked like you were going to say something.
yeah, they would have a better chance of building the right thing the first time
Why?
rather than building
Because
something and finding out. because they'll get feedback quicker, and they can just ask someone if they have any doubts.
And if you know the same person who gave you the requirements is going to be the one testing them, if you have any doubts, that's a very great incentive to ask rather than assume.
Okay, more. This is good. Maybe break this communication down a little bit more. So you're saying the person you need to is there. I guess, and if information is misunderstood, you can get that better.
I mean, all of the communication stuff is really just about avoiding waste and reducing delays.
Yeah.
So the easier it is to tap somebody on the shoulder and say, "Hey, what did you mean by this?" The
Yeah.
faster you're and more likely you're going to be able to get that feedback so that you're doing the right things.
Yeah, there's another thing that hits me, and I'll tell a little story too that's interesting. Um, there's this immediate availability. I think Patrick mentioned that or inferred that. See, if the BA is on another team doing something else, then they're not immediately available and you got to wait. And Andrew, you just emphasized that. Okay, so here, let me go. So these are some good reasons. And I'd say these are actually the major reasons. Okay. Communication, you have all the skills you needed. I didn't actually say that, but in team one, they had all the skills they needed. In team two, they sometimes had all the skills needed. Okay. Okay. And people talk about stable teams. That's the other thing. In team one, you had a stable team, and in team two, you didn't because people would come and go to it. But I realize when I'm writing this, teams need to be stable for a project or an incremental addition of value because it could be a product enhancement. They don't need to be stable when they go to another one. This is one of the myths. When people talk about stable teams, you do not lock down your team. This team is here forever. Um, oh, can't think of her name. Dynamic reteaming. Um, can't think of her name. Heidi Helfand. She wrote a book about this. And think about it. If you're a growing company, you can't have, oh, I got one team, now I'll start a whole new one. There's a dynamic reteaming required for things. So that was just an insight. So we get three times. What I found was three times just by having a team with everybody there that's co-located. Now, these guys weren't doing Agile. If you use iterative incremental methods, such as Scrum or something like that, you'll get another three times improvement because you'll get even more feedback. And if you're doing XP type code craftsmanship, three times three times three is pretty close to 30. So Jeff wasn't kidding. It's very possible. So we want to ask ourselves why dedicated cross-functional teams are so important. And actually, you've kind of hit a lot of these skills needed, better communication. You've added some I didn't put up here. Quick feedback because of the communication, things like that. This is really critical. We have to understand this is essentially why team agility is a good thing. Okay. And as Andrew said, the key is really removing delays. You know, skills needed available, local handoffs mean fewer handbacks. A handback is when you give it to somebody and then they come back later, but you don't need that when you're right there in the team because you get better feedback. Okay.
Al, can I ask a question here?
Please. Yeah, please do.
So there's obviously a conflict between the, reduction in waste and delays and the interruption required to get the clarification if you need it. So is there a way to make sure that because people are immediately available, that they're not continually interrupted?
Yeah, that's a great question because one of the things that happened before the Agile Manifesto when XP was coming and we had co-located and they had open space in there. I don't mean open space as the technology. I mean just the cubicles and all that. Is some people loved it and some people couldn't stand it. And the reason is very noisy. And it's like you'd almost hear other people. For me, I admit I loved it. I have you know, um, I have like 3 kids, 6 grandkids. I'm used to noise around me. Uh, but I can tune it out. Actually, I have 4 kids now, but at the time that happened when my youngest was smaller. Um, but a lot of people can't do that. Okay. A lot of people like their space. I also like to work by myself at times. So what you want to do and what I've done, and it works very effectively, is to actually come up with a way where you can tell somebody you have a problem without forcing an interruption. Okay. So I'm going to say that again. To get quick returns, you need to let the team know you have a problem without forcing interruptions. Now, the way I've done this, and it works extremely well, is something like Slack. It doesn't have to be Slack. It can be Teams. It can be anything. And we would make an agreement at the start of a project that said, look, when I'm having troubles, when any of us are having troubles, put a message on Slack. And we had a channel for it, like, hey, need help. And what would happen is a little thing would go off on your icon on the bottom bar. And if you were busy and didn't want to attend to it, you didn't attend to it. And when you were at a break, you attended to it. Said, oh, I could help this person. And then so the response time was usually actually immediate because it was usually somebody who didn't mind being interrupted or somebody like me that I didn't mind being interrupted as somebody with what formally is called attention deficit disorder, but I prefer to call it rapid mind movement. I kind of like interruptions. Not many people do, but I do. Okay. And so that works extremely well. In fact, what we found when we did that is we didn't need daily stand-ups. However, because you always want to make sure they're available when you need them, we would schedule daily stand-ups. See, this is part of what the idea of the daily scrum is in Scrum, is to catch this when you need this help. And so daily scrums are good if you need them, but they're also a symptom that you're not communicating in real time with people. See, XP didn't have daily scrums or daily XPs because you didn't need it. And yeah, daily scrums can be also used because it's figuring out what you're going to do for the day. But if you truly did that, you wouldn't need the sprint planning. So there's kind of people don't do it that way. I view if you have sprints, you can do sprint planning. Otherwise, you can do 1-day time boxing, seeing what you're going to do. But daily scrums are normally used to see what went wrong. How do I pivot? How do I do? So what we would also do, aside from having this interactive attention getting thing, is we would schedule daily stand-ups every day. We'd have them scheduled every day of the week. And what we would do is at the end of the day, we would say, is there a need for tomorrow's stand-up? And typically people would say no. And then we had one that we always did. We always did Friday, whether we needed it or not, just to be in touch with people, because maybe it's just so easy to say, I don't need help. Okay. Here's the quick story, say, in response to all this too. I, at one time, was at a company where I was training people in C++. Okay. And they were Fortran developers learning C++. And I knew the whole team had gone and taken C++ training. I didn't train them in C++, but my job was there to support them. And these guys were it's about a team of 8. They were about 150 feet away, maybe. They weren't more than that. It was definitely smaller than a football field. I was at one end of the building. They were at the other end of the building. And for a couple of days after the workshop, now I knew these people had questions. Nobody learned C++ questions. It's a complete mind shift to go from procedural Fortran to object-oriented. So I kept asking emails, I sent emails out every morning. Hey, I'm here. You have any questions? And they would say, oh, no, we're good. We're good. And I was like, no, they're not this good. I mean, and it wasn't like they were bad. Just nobody is that good. Okay. So what I decided to start doing is walking down the 125, whatever feet it was. I just would walk down there like around 11 or something in the morning. And I'd say, hey guys, how you doing? And they would all be happy and say, oh, we're doing great. And I said, I'm just here to see if you need any support or any questions. Do you have any? They'd say no. I said, okay, great. Well, just remember, if you have any, give me a call. I'm just down the hall, happy to come. And I would turn around and I would not get 5 feet from having turned around when they, hey, Al, while you're here. I did that for like 2 or 3 weeks, and it was the same play every time. Oh, no problems. Oh, Al, while you're here. So people don't like to ask for help. It's called human nature. Okay, but if you offer it in a very nice way where they don't feel they're being demeaned, they will often accept it. So that's an important thing to remember. I should put that in the book, our coaching book, which is actually going to be pushed out on Leanpub in the next few days, believe it or not. Okay. So one of the things to remove delays is to avoid multitasking. And everybody talks about multitasking like it's a real problem. It's a symptom of a bigger problem. This is like the shallow thinking we get in this industry. People rant and rave about multitasking, but it's a symptom of too many things in play, not delivering value quickly enough, getting slow feedback. This causes the creation of waste, which is much worse than the 25 to 40% impact of multitasking. My estimate is the delay, the work created is typically even greater than the work you need to do. So it's 50% or more extra stuff, not the 25 to 40%. So yes, multitasking is bad, but we want to look at what's worse, not getting the information. But when I say creates waste, I mean, you're working on the wrong thing. You don't know you're working on the wrong thing, and you don't get feedback, so you keep working on the wrong thing. That's waste. That's what's meant really in software by eliminate waste. Get rid of that waste. Or if something's not of value, don't do it. And it's working on the wrong thing. We create waste. In software, we got to stop. It's not so much eliminating waste as eliminating the creation of waste. Okay. So, little quick thing here. What are the causes of delays in our workflow? Or what causes multitasking? So I want you guys to give me, I'll just take notes right here. See, these are almost the same thing, actually. They're very highly related. They're not the same thing. We've talked about some of them. I just want you to throw some in. Or is it actually the inverse of some of these?
The two things that I can think of are people giving you extra stuff to do. And if you actually have a set thing to do with other dependencies and you're done, you're going to start something else because you're not just going to sit around scrolling through YouTube or whatever. At least most people probably won't after the first while. So they're done, but they can't go forward because it's not time for that yet. So they start something else. And then when that dependency has been resolved and it's time for them to do something, then they're in the middle of the thing that they started or thought they could work on and haven't finished yet.
Yeah. So working on extra stuff is one of the big things that has a lot of these impacts, right? Because you're working on extra stuff.
Yes.
And then it delays everything. You start generating more questions you need answered. That interrupts other people. It's really a messy thing. This is actually the thing I've been seeing as the root cause of almost everything is delays in the workflow. And that's caused by working on too many things. Okay, I don't think we need to go into this too much because we already covered that to some level.
Well, there I would add a couple of things actually.
Yeah,
One would be
please.
assumptions. That assumptions are there. We don't clear them up. And the other thing would be working on things that are not the constraint. So that makes delays in the workflow.
Okay, well now that opens up a can of worms. I can tell you're a TOC guy. By that he means, just to be clear, what Sergio means, if systems typically have a constraint in them, that's what's causing things not to get delivered. And if you work on things other than that, you might help that, but it's a local improvement and it's not going to help value get delivered. So working on other things that aren't what's holding you back doesn't really help the overall improvement. What a constraint is, it might be worth even a conversation about that, but we're not going to do that today because I have a feeling our view of constraints is a little different than technically TOC. In other words, we're always talking about system constraints. Andrew and I had a conversation about this the other day, and I kind of forget what we call them. There's some constraints that are in the workflow, and we call those workflow constraints. And there's other constraints that cause workflow constraints, but they're like not having an intake process, say, by something missing. So that'd be another good session to have. That might be a good session even for the TOC for this one. Yeah, Susan.
And along those lines, many of my roles have been as a business analyst or a software tester. And I found that if I got working agreements with people who were working on things I had either written the requirements for or was going to test, I had a kind of thing, you can interrupt me if you have a question about any of this stuff. And that made things faster.
Yeah. Yeah. People don't like to be interrupted, so they infer other people don't want them to interrupt them. That's an important, I got another book edition, I guess. People don't like to be interrupted, so they project on others that they don't want to be interrupted. So then they don't. They hold themselves back. They're constraining themselves. This is one of the reasons why in my workshops I always talk about people giving me negative feedback and saying, "Hey, got to tell me what's wrong. Got to tell me what I'm saying wrong. Got to tell me what I left out." Because normally people don't like that kind of correction, but I think it's essential. Yeah, Susan, you had another thing.
Well, and this is also part of how alignment happens sort of organically, which is that if people know that on this topic it's okay to interrupt and they get what they need, then they
Brilliant.
don't have to wait for you to answer an email 6 days
Yeah.
later or whatever.
Yeah, this is really nice. This is, setting up how the teams work. We talk about that in the book, but I'm not sure we talk about this part of it. Okay, cool. Any other things? Thank you for not letting me slip by here.
Have we mentioned dependencies, Al?
Yeah, no, we haven't. Dependencies
Something
that
about-
happen, then you gotta injects that injects need for other kind of wasting. Here, just a second. I don't know. I was having troubles with this. Yeah, dependencies cause a problem. Now, dependencies are more of a problem when they are across teams. So here they didn't have dependencies. This is one of the big myths in the Agile space, is Agile was a team-centric approach and it's being tried at an organization level approach. Agile at a team level is easy. It is easy. And I know it's easy because I've done it in an hour. I'm not kidding, an hour. That's all these people had. I was on site with a client once, and they brought me in to do design patterns and some emergent architecture stuff. And then they were arguing with each other about how they were going to run the project. And I admit that's the case where I said I was there and I wanted to put my head in my hands, but I had the wherewithal to know that a consultant putting their head in their hands does not instill confidence in the consultant. So I was here wanting to put my head in my hands and holding my head up. And I was saying, what the F am I doing at this place now? Took a deep breath. And I then spent an hour telling them how to work. That was it. And we installed a kind of iterative incremental development system, not unlike Scrum, because they weren't doing tests first, but they knew some of the technical stuff. And that was the only thing I gave them. I'd given them one other thing in 5 minutes earlier, which was about requirements. I said, if you're asked to do something, always ask, how will I know I've done that? That was their test first. That was it. That was their test first training. When somebody asks you a question, how will you know I've done that? And then the contract ran out. They never had any more funds to do anything. And 10 months later, because it was a 10-month, it was a kind of a big thing. They called me up. The guy said, hey, I just want to tell you how it went. And it went brilliantly. They said they did what I said about how to work, and it was fine. And it was because they were co-located. They had no outside dependencies. They just built it themselves. It's easy. I've done this more than once. It's just not hard to do. But when you have dependencies, when you have the needs for outside communications, all of a sudden that becomes overwhelming. Okay. So like I said, so this is really the issue. We have you get this vicious cycle or an effective cycle. And operating a product development process near full utilization is an economic disaster. This is word for word out of Principles of Product Development Flow, which is 15 years ago and still 20 years ahead of its time. That's Don's work is typically that way. And we tend to operate at full capacity and or beyond. I've actually even heard some managers say, "Oh, when they needed some more capacity, oh, this Ralph's is only fully occupied right now, but since he's not always going to be able to work on these projects, sometimes he'll have gaps. Let's load him up to 140% capacity as we see it." I literally used to hear that all the time. Okay, so we want to work on small things as well. Goldratt said often reducing batch size. How big a thing? Maybe we shouldn't be working on 6-month projects. Maybe we should be working on small things. So there's the concept of the minimum valuable increment, which is an important concept. In fact, I have seen companies transform themselves just on this concept alone. What's the smallest thing we can build and release? The problem is there's no term for this. It's not an MVP, which has since been bastardized anyway. An MVP is one you're trying to discover if a product is of value. So you work within capacity is the key thing here. And this is an important slide. I'm going to give you a corollary in a second. Shine said, we don't think and talk about what we see what we are able to think and talk about. Now, if you think about that, there's truth to this. You should be able to see this. If we're not thinking and talking about it, we don't even notice it. But here's the problem. We create our world, our understanding of the world anyway, and how we speak and what we look at. So I have this corollary to this, which is if we don't have a term for it, we're not talking about it, and therefore we're not seeing it. So the fact that you could talk about what we mean by minimum valuable increments, the next thing you could release, is not as is ineffective compared to if you actually use the term. Again, goes back to communication, very critical. Okay, so what can we do about this? We can create a focus on finishing. This is really simple. Unfinished work is the bane of development. It delays delivery of value. It causes multitasking. It injects delays to feedback, which causes, we've been talking about this whole time. Okay. So how do we do this? Real simple. Once you finish something, is there something else I can finish before picking up something new? It's not hard. Minimum valuable increment. In other words, if I start a new feature, start it in some MVI that's already been started. If I start a new story, start it in a feature. In other words, I'm finishing stories, finishing features, finishing MVIs. I'm finishing work in process. Maybe I can help somebody else finish something. This should be, I guess, doing surgery on people's eyeballs so they see this. They're always looking at what can I finish next is probably not an ethical thing to do, but maybe we just get them glasses, and if they don't need glasses, we get them clear glasses that says, what can you finish next? It would really produce, I'm kidding, of course, but it's like I've got it's funny. I'm not going to turn my screen around, but if I did, you would see I've got like a bunch of Post-its on my screens, things to remind me about stuff. It's like, is this judgment or awareness when I get reactive? Who am I being now? Have I gone into my past kid or am I being an adult now? I literally got about 7 or 8 of them. Then I got pictures of my wife and kids too. But it's like to remind me of things. This has to be in front of you all the time. This will number the items in play. In fact, I guess we should get back to making posters like we used to at Net Objectives. There are 3 or 4 things like this that just should be in front of you all the time. Okay. So this is another thing maybe, Andrew, you inferred about starting early. I guess I don't know. This bugged me this morning. I keep hearing how the definition of ready is so bad because it's a phase gate. Maybe it's because we talked about this yesterday, it got mentioned. And, when you start early, you don't have capacity. Everything else gets finished, doesn't get you ahead of the game. It injects delays into the workflow because now you're working on many things. Working on too many things is not a good idea. Creates weight. We've all been saying this, okay? People want to do this because of improper budgeting, use it or lose it kind of ideas. You got to fix the source of the problem. You got to look to see who's available. So this is the thing. I was 1 slide ahead. It's not a bad thing that it's a phase gate. Don't start something if you're not supposed to. That's a good phase gate. I don't know why it's attacked for this. This is a good thing. We tend to start too early, projects too early. That's a good thing if we stop doing that. You you have to understand what you're going to build before you start it. Not the details, but that's the definition of done. Have the capacity to build it, know who's there. It's a good gate before starting. I'm just throwing that in because this seems to be a little bit of insanity. Okay. Now we've been having interaction, so I'm going to just keep going this way and using more of my normally 20 to 30 minute allotted time, as I said. But I'm going to try to keep it where I finish this in 10 minutes. So pull is another required mechanism. One thing that all Agile methods agree with is using pull, because pull enables you not to get overloaded. Pull basically means that you only take on work when you have the capacity for it. Okay, now this is not quite true because you can get overloaded if people push work on you. But if all you're doing is getting your work when you say you have capacity, you don't get overloaded. This is the way we avoid being overloaded. This is actually the most important thing in Agile space in my mind. Don't pull things of less value because it distracts you. So you got to know that. So then there are a lot of implications of what's of value, which we're not going to do now. I do talk about that as success criteria things. Okay. I wanted to use pull, though, as also a driving mechanism. This is a review for the ACEs, but I don't know if I've got this, put this in a nice public place, it'd be good. So I had an interesting experience with using pull a few months ago. I have a contracting company that does some graphics for me at times. And I was like, oh, this is real simple. I'll just throw some things in PowerPoint, tell them here, make them better, do this or that with them. And it wasn't that complicated. And we hadn't worked with this company before, but I'd had an associate had used them, so I knew they were good. And boy, was I wrong. They just were wasting time and doing weird things. And I was like, oh my God. Now, the thing was, I knew it wasn't their fault. I knew it was my fault. This is part of the responsibility. In other words, I created this system, say, hey, go do what you want, and then figured out and get back to me, and it wasn't working. But I set that up. I gave them the ability to do whatever they wanted in terms of managing, the self-managing part. And it was clearly not working. I didn't get the least bit upset when I found out, oh, they'd wasted, fortunately, the fact is also the rate was low. So it was like I could bear the error. So I said, okay, the problem here is we don't have any agreements on how we're working. We don't have any agreements on how we're getting feedback. They're going off the deep end at times, and there's no way to manage this. So I did an explicit workflow. This is one of the cornerstones of Kanban, which somehow seems to have gotten lost. In 2009, when David Anderson and I put on the Miami Lean Kanban conference, first Kanban conference done, I mentioned this before, we were kind of attacked by Ken and Jeff about talking about Kanban and explicit workflows and things like that. So we decided we would look at what is the essence? What is the real essence? What differentiates Kanban from everything else? Now, there are a lot of things. Is flow model, using pull, little pieces. But we both independently came to the conclusion that having an explicit workflow was the biggest difference. And the reason was, first of all, that you could have such a thing. You could say how you're going to work together specifically with details, because Kanban's based on lean, which means there is a science of flow under it. So you don't need meetings as much because everybody knows how they're working. So what I did is I put this in place. And I talked to them. And I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make a backlog containing the items that are you to be worked on. Then you just pull. Well, when they first start, they don't do two, but you'll pull the top item. So I'd sequence these because I'm the the client, and then they would work on it. And then when they were done, they would put it in items done, and I would then look to see if I accepted it or put it back, and they would look for something new. So they were self-managing. They were pulling work when they had capacity. They would pull from the order. So I did the prioritization. So I was like the PO, and they were doing everything else. And this worked brilliantly because now we had a mechanism that they would do one at a time and not do the whole batch. So this got them into small batches, got them where I can give them feedback. And notice I didn't have to be interrupted. I would just look when I had a chance to see what had happened. So a couple times a day when I didn't have, when I was between things, I would look to see what was done, and then I would do my part. So we were working in a completely asynchronous but quick way of working. And I did tell them if they had a big problem with something, just defer it and go to the next one. So it wasn't even a problem that I wasn't. If it was something where we needed them in sequence, I could have said I'm going to be interruptible, but that wasn't what was necessary there. So we had both work in process management, clear workflow, good backloads, create status. This is very simple. Pull is really important. Most teams I go into, most organizations I go into lose pull very fast. Interruptions are not pull. That's a push model. You got to do this. This is very critical. What we've got to remember is this is our dilemma. We're organized one way and we're organized in silos hierarchically. And the reality is we are busy, but our work isn't busy. These are the delays. This is what we've been saying. This needs to be front of mind. Yeah, I'm really clear. I need to make this poster. It doesn't have to have but about half a dozen things on it. Okay, and people don't know how long it is. If I was going to measure one thing, I would measure this. How much time is work waiting? I can tell you right now. Okay, I can't prove this, but I've got 25 years of experience looking at this. If you look at what's called the process cycle efficiency, in other words, how much time is something being worked on versus the calendar time. By the way, if you're working on three things, and by definition, your process cycle efficiency is going to be less than 33% because you can do, a third on this, a third on this, a third on this. My experience is that the more delay there is, it's highly correlated to the waste you're creating. So if you've got a process cycle efficiency of 80%, it's worse than that. I mean, of 20% or 80%, probably 80% of what you're working on is waste you created. Okay, I'm almost done. By the way, notice when you're in one of these situations, I want to point this out. Everything we've talked about has been the individual is in a situation where they have little control over what's happening. Remember team one, team two? They didn't say which team they were in. But everything we've talked about, this is systems thinking. Everything we've talked about illustrates systems thinking. The system causes the problems. Okay, this is a summary of everything. So we'd like to think we do this, but in fact, we've got quality issues at times. And sometimes we don't understand the requirements, but we didn't get feedback quickly because of delays. So we work on the wrong thing. And then delays create this work. We talked about working on the wrong thing is wasted time. Maybe instead of created work, I should say wasted time. It's actually maybe a little clearer. Is that clear? Instead of saying created work, say wasted time? Yeah, I kind of like that too. Wasted time. Okay, multitasking. And then again, we have less efficiencies. Multitasking hurts us. But this is my point. Multitasking hurts us here by a certain percentage, but this is the big cost. Lean tells us it's not going faster, it's eliminating all this stuff. It appears faster. But you don't hear this much. And if you don't hear it, you're not thinking it, you're not seeing it. Okay. So this was just something you got to think global. You got to look at the whole value stream, but you got to act local. Focus on value, feedback, remove delays, small completions, avoid multitasking, focus on finishing, use pull. And this is the summary slide. Okay, we talked about this. My experience is you need flow, lean, and this is the technology part. I also call human-centered development, which was the book about, and what we intermix into the ACE program as well. How people get triggered, react to things, and all that. Okay. I think I meant to. Yeah, I just threw this in because I just want to make sure I got this definition in the loss value due to the delay in a stakeholder being able to use something. That's what cost of delay means. And Reinertson, who is, in my mind, one of the two most insightful people in the industry right now, Tom Gill being the other one. And I'll put a plug. Remember, Friday, 9 o'clock this week, we're going to be Pacific. We're going to be talking. He says, quantify this, but I add the cost of delay is not just that it takes longer to get value out the door, but that in the process of delay, the amount of work that is required gets larger because you're wasting your time. Okay. Questions, comments? First of all, feedback for me. Was this okay? Instead of making it a 20, 30-minute presentation, I injected about 10 or 15 minutes of discussion, and then I just took longer. That seemed better. Questions about this? Comments that we missed? Yeah, please, Tony.
I really liked your we're busy, but our work is not.
Yeah.
That there's a juxtaposition and an image there that is very powerful, I think.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I typically use this. These two slides everywhere I go. And I've been using this for 22 years. I actually remember where I got this. I knew this, but it was at a conference I was at where Dan North went up and whiteboarded this. I give him credit for that. I don't remember what conference that was at, but it wasn't the new insight to me. He didn't do this. What he did is he put this up on the board. Okay. Any other things that stood out? Okay, well, I have a topic. Let me look at the chat. I didn't look at the chat. Oh, yeah, that's great. A new app for Google Glass. This is the use of artificial intelligence now. Somebody watches you and sees what you're doing wrong, and then Google Glass just shows up, focus on finishing, you idiot, or something like that, that would be good. Actually, we have a computer in front of us. Maybe we just throw it up on the computer screen, electrify the keyboard if they keep doing the wrong thing, Probably the government would get on us if we tried doing that, but oh yeah, functional and relationship constraints. That's right. Thank you, Andrew. This was referring to when I talked about constraints. Theory constraints the people do theory constraints that focus on it tend to focus on the constraint in the workflow, which is useful. But sometimes it's something else caused those constraints, and what else happened is not in the workflow, or it's just something like not having an intake process, something missing. Okay. Okay, anything else? Otherwise, I want to take the 10 minutes to talk about something else. And I think I might do this as the next session, because that's what I was preparing for before I realized, oops, Al, that's not what you said you're going to talk about. So I started preparing for today with what's needed for Agile. And I started thinking about it in my mind. Here, I'm just going to throw my notes up here to read. I don't know. I don't care if you read them, but they're just if you're wondering what I'm looking at. And okay. So this was like the start. A lot of people define Agile by what happened in 2001, which I personally think is absurd. Because first of all, 15 men did it. There was a whole crew of us at that time back then, several hundred people. Not that many were into Agile back in 2001, but there were quite a few of us. There were hundreds, maybe thousands, but there were hundreds. And I liked the manifesto as a declaration that teams needed to do certain ways of things. But I never signed the manifesto because I immediately recognized it didn't have systems thinking in it. And I'm not very good. I'm like Mark Twain. I believe prediction's difficult, especially when it's about the future. But I knew this was going to be a problem. The lack of systems thinking, this people over process is a mistake, but I knew what they meant. What they mean is you don't follow something blindly, although now Scrum proponents say follow until you understand, which to me is saying that's just a violation of it because you're following this instead of understanding it, which is possible up front. Systems thinking says you've got to take responsibility for how the system is affecting people instead of blaming people. And this is just not there. But there's another piece to it. One of the things about Agile, which is an important concept, and in fact, this is in the manifesto, is 100 units of value delivered at 10 months is not as valuable as 1 unit of value, excuse me, after 10 months, I should say, is 10 units delivered every month. Same total amount, but delivering frequently, first of all, affects the cost of delay, which we talked about. But more importantly, or as importantly, it enables you to get feedback. Hey, is this really the right product? Maybe it's not the right product. Okay. So as I started writing what Agile was, I started realizing, you're not writing what Agile is because most of Agile doesn't agree with what you're writing. Scrum and Safe don't go along with what I'm writing. Anybody who believes we're in a complex situation and can't see the cause and effect of what's going on doesn't agree with what I'm saying. Now, I'm not saying you understand everything, but I realized these were the ideas. First of all, we can identify success factors. We can. And we must. Now, this isn't saying exactly how the product will be built. It's saying what will success mean? And I don't know how the product is going to be built. I don't know all of these. There's uncertainty. There's no question there's uncertainty. But if I don't know where I'm going, it's not a good thing. And a lot of people deny this. They talk about we can't know this. And a really good book about this, if you're really adamant on holding on to this, this is a good book because it violates, but he's got a lot of evidence. I love anecdotal books. Now, I've mentioned this book any number of times. What I love about, here we go. A second, I know you can't see it. Here we go. This is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant book because he'll say so many things that are true that fly in the face of what's common knowledge in the Agile space. It's very interesting how big things get done. He also talks about some well-known construction projects. The Guggenheim Museum in, I forget where, somewhere in Spain, and also
Barcelona, I think.
No, I don't think it's Barcelona, actually. It's a smaller place. Here, let's see. Bilboa. There it is. Yeah, it's in Bilboa. And also the in the Australia, that opera house thing that you're, in he talks about these two, which one did well and one didn't do well, and why. And there's a lot of interesting things that does relate to our kind of projects, but violates a lot of the thinking we have. So that's really good. What is of value is market changes. Okay, this will change. So what our success criteria and constraints may change as the value changes, and there are things we have to avoid. We've got to avoid what's not important. That we're redoing work. That these two things have people working away. We got to recognize this. So we need clarity. So I was about a third of the way through this when I realized, you're building the wrong thing. Let's wait a week. But my point is, what is Agile? Is it how the team works agilely? You have a team. The Agile Manifesto is a team-centric. It's funny, people sometimes don't believe me when I say this. And I'm like, well, don't believe me. I don't want you to believe me. Never believe a consultant. That's been my motto for years. Not that they're not trustworthy, but that if they can't convince you of it on your own, if they can't show you how to understand it yourself, then they don't know what they're doing, basically. Okay. So what I would suggest is, if you, not here, because this doesn't talk about it, but if you look at the 12 principles, read this and see how many times team is mentioned or developers are mentioned, which is part of the team. This is all team-centric, developers. Who's developing the work? Projects motivated. It's all individual and developers, about 80% of it, which is fine because that's where we were at the moment. But it's not where we are now. We're at an organization. So you define Agile at the organization level, or you define Agile at the team level. And a lot of people think those are two different things. I think business agility, the ability for companies, organizations to express Agile methods, that's where I'm headed with this. And I realize, well, what is Agile? What is Agile is an open question. So when I do this topic, I think I will do this next week. I think it's important. I'm going to say, what is Amplio's definition of Agile? Oh, I can do that. I didn't quite realize how to phrase this. So I'm going to do, what is Amplio's definition of Agile? I can do that. Because my definition of Agile is effective at the organization, and it's what requires you to look at these issues. That how do teams interact? How can people interact? Okay. Anyway, that's what I'm going to do next week. I think this is very important, and I like how I can say it now. So then you can disagree. Well, that's your definition. That's not our definition. Okay, that's fine. I'm in this camp. If you're interested in this, then come with me. If you're not, that's fine too. In other words, I'm not saying I've got the right path. A lot of people say that about me, that I think I've got the one way. I'm almost the only guy who actually recommends all my competitors. How many times have I said that Steve Tendon, Wolfram Mueller, and Peter Merrill are people you should go to? Well, they're all based on TOC. But then there are lots of others. I just don't know them as well. Okay. Any comments, questions, feedback for me? I'm going to get this recording up quickly on our site, and then it'll be posted on the YouTube list as well. So anyway, thanks for participating. I kind of enjoyed this session. I am going to try to go back to shorter sessions, but this one felt it wasn't that bad because we did have a lot of Q&A and you didn't have questions at the end. But anyway, I felt interjecting the discussions enabled me to get more time and still keep my word. Take care. Stay safe. I'll see some of you tomorrow. And thanks for being here. Take care.